Welcome to NWA Cane Corso's podcast, where we talk all things dogs.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another show. I am your host, Joe of NWA Cane Corso. Today I got a special guest with some good information, Mr. Vito Alu. He's out of Missouri, owner of Braveheart, American Bulldogs, international judge, and did it in the USA and over Europe. His first litter was in 1994.
It's a long time ago.
12 to 13 generations in. How you doing? How you doing, Vito? You want to anything else? You want to tell the people about
that
yourself?
Pretty much hits it. I breed American Bulldogs. I don't know why I'm still around, but I still wake up excited every day to do it.
Well, today we're going to be diving into a really hot topic, a topic that's going to help a lot of people, even myself. And that's hip evaluations, the difference between PennHip and OFA, and some different things. Are there specific breeds you think need it more than others, or you think this is something that need to be done all across the board?
When I started, it was kind of a strange education. I started, the first male that I ever kept was abnormally huge. And all I ever heard from people was, oh, those big dogs, they'll fall apart. They have bad hips. They have this, they have that. So I guess I was hypersensitive to hips. I really thought hip dysplasia and all that was the worst thing that could happen. And so I became pretty crazy about getting into the hip evaluations. The first 15 years, I spent a fortune on hip evaluations. I started with this big male, and I got him OFA'd, and he was OFA good prelim, which doesn't mean anything. And then I got into PennHip. Back in I guess it was 94, 95, I did him. A PennHip was $165. Now they're 400 something to $700-800 for a PennHip, which I don't know. I have a good friend who's a vet. And I was asking her today, I said, why do you think it's so much more expensive? And she gave a couple reasons, but none of them make any sense to me. But I thought it was because of the anesthesia. With the OFA, the dog doesn't have to be quite knocked out as much. And with the PennHip, they have to be totally knocked out. Does basically one view, where PennHip does three. They do the same one as OFA, which is called an extended position, where the dog's on his back, and then his back legs are pulled down, and then they adjust the hips, and then they take an X-ray. That X-ray is all OFA does, and it's a good X-ray for looking for osteoarthritis, or DJD, which is calcification around the femur head or in the socket that shows that there's wear. So I started really getting into, I used to do 2, 3, 4 pups out of every litter, because with PennHip, you can reliably do a PennHip at 4 months, over 4 months.
Okay. Which
is a huge plus, because with OFA, of course, you have to wait till they're 2 years old to get a pass, fail, whatever, the OFA excellent, good, or fair, or mild, and all that stuff. So with PennHip, and it's pretty reliable. Like, I've done dogs at 4 months. I've done it again a year. I've done 2 dogs old, like 7, 8 years old. And the scores are pretty consistent.
Really?
So,
okay.
I think to start out, the best thing, it gets confusing with when you say hip dysplasia. OFA rates dogs dysplastic, mildly dysplastic, severely dysplastic, blah, blah, blah. Dysplasia, the definition of dysplasia is abnormal hip joint conformation. So that's the science of OFA, is based on hip joint conformation. And when they do it, they do that X-ray where they pull the legs down and they take the X-ray, because you can see the femur heads and the socket really well. But that's a totally unnatural stance. The dogs don't walk around on their back legs upright like humans. They have their legs right underneath them. And so when you're pulling the legs down, that the way the joint fits together, that's not normal. That's like us twisting our leg back behind our head and taking an x-ray and saying, oh, yeah, this guy's got funky hips.
Yeah. Yeah.
So OFA, their method is basically a subjective evaluation. They have 3 doctors that look at the radiographs. And what they're looking at is the depth of the femur. The femur head is a round ball connected to the leg, and then the socket. And they're looking at how deep it fits in there, how perfect it fits, how they have actually Nuremberg angles. They have all these different things, but there's really no clinically studied science that proves that hip joint conformation is the best way to predict future hip problems. Because when you evaluate a dog, what you want to do is you want to know, hey, this dog has got problem hips. We don't want to breed this dog. Well, at 2 years of age, most dogs, unless they have really, really bad hips, they're not going to have signs of wear. They're not going to have issues. So that's why PennHip is different. They don't go on hip joint conformation. They go off of a measurement. They do one x-ray where the hips are pulled back just to look for the DJD, which is called, it stands for degenerative joint disease, or osteoarthritis, which is basically shows up on the x-ray as like calcification. What that means is that hip joint has worn the enamel off the bone, and now it's bone and bone.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing I think people need to realize is the conformation or the whole mechanism of the hip joint. You have a femur head, you have the socket, and at the top of the femur head, you have a tendon. That tendon goes into the middle of the socket, and that tendon keeps the hip socket from popping out. And it's just like if your sister had a doll, old-fashioned dolls, they'd have the little leg with the rubber band that holds it in.
Right.
That tendon works like that rubber band to hold it in. Then on top of that, every joint, even like when you crack your knuckles, that's what this is. There's a membrane that goes around the whole joint, and it's sealed. And so, like in PennHip, if they distract it too much and break that seal, they can see fluid that leaks in the joint, and it's called cavitation. So when they get that, they don't score because it can make the joint a little bit looser than normal. So you have it's an encapsulated joint. So when they PennHip, they do the OFA view only to look for DJD or signs of osteoarthritis. But then they do what they call a passive hip joint stance. The dog's on his back, but his feet are up like he's standing up in a natural position where he'd be standing up. And what they do is they push the hip socket in. They'll have weighted, some use dog food bags. They push them in and they hold the legs up. So the joint is pushed in as far as it'll go. And they take an x-ray like that. Then they have a thing called the distractor. It looks like 2 rungs of a ladder. It's two rungs of a ladder, and it's adjustable. There's different sizes. There's different adjustments. The vet will measure their hip, and then they use the appropriate size one. So it looks like 2 rungs of a ladder, and then the bars on the side have foam on them. And the reason why they have foam is because they place that in between the dog's legs, and then they push in on it, which causes the hip joint to distract. It'll pull out. And then they take another x-ray of that. And then what they do back at PennHip, they have techs that actually measure the movement from the pushed in to the pulled out. And they have it's down to like a micrometer. It's very, very precise. So it goes from 0 to 1. There are dogs that can be up to 1. And there's no dogs that are 0, but there's some breeds that are really tight hips that don't have any incidence of hip dysplasia that can be 0.05 to 0.15, which is crazy tight. And the American Bulldogs, when I started out, they have what they call a median. So they take all the dogs in the database and they average out the scores. And when I started, they were 0.58. That was the average. And so PennHip they have a recommendation. They don't have a pass or fail. They have a measurement. And basically the science with PennHip is the tighter the hip joint, the longer the dog can go before it will start showing signs of wear. And it depends on the breed. Like a Chihuahua can have a pretty loose hip joint because it's may only weigh 5 pounds, might only weigh 8 pounds.
Yeah.
But an English Mastiff can't tolerate a whole lot.
A lot of weight.
Yeah, because if it's kind of like if you're driving a little tiny car and the ball joints or the suspension piece is loose, might make a difference, but it's not going to be so bad. But if you have a Mack truck and it's carrying a load and you have suspension pieces that are loose and you're driving 55 miles an hour, bad things could happen. Things could break because there's more mass.
Right.
So different breeds have different tolerances to what they call, when they measure that, they call it a distraction index. So that number is DI, it's distraction index. So the research, and PennHip's had a lot of different clinical trials, peer-reviewed trials that show basically most breeds, if you have a score between 0.30 or tighter, most of those dogs can live a relatively long life without ever having any DJD, no degenerative joint disease, and no osteoarthritis. The looser the hip, the sooner the dogs usually get some signs of arthritis or wear on the joint. Different breeds are different. Like German Shepherds can't tolerate much looseness to the hips. If you get a German Shepherd in the 5s, he's probably going to have signs of bad lameness when he gets to be 5-6 years old. Whereas my breed, American Bulldogs, I've had dogs I tested that were in the 6s, some even in the 7s, and I'm like, I put them in a pet home, whatever. And those dogs live their whole life, never limp, never show signs of anything, maybe up till 10, 11, 12 years of age. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of American Bulldogs have a lot of muscle in their rear.
Right.
And they're not running every day. They're not jumping off the roof of your house and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So the wear, and they have a really high pain tolerance. American Bulldogs have a crazy pain tolerance. So it makes a difference. Whereas a German Shepherd, I think it's probably because of the conformation of German Shepherds that they have an abnormal slant to the rear now. And some of the dogs, even the show ring, you'll see they walk on their back haunches. They're not really walking. They're walking on their hocks and not walking on their paws.
Yeah.
That can make a difference. And like I said, little dogs can handle a lot more distraction, a lot more looseness. So OFA doesn't, they talk about a little, sometimes they'll talk about a subluxation, which is kind of they're saying that the hips are loose. But the problem is the way they hold their hip joints, you can't really tell. That's not a natural way. You can't say, oh, look, his hips are coming out of socket. Well, they're not the way they naturally should be. Like when the dog's standing up, his hip socket's like this, but when you pull his legs out, they're like this. It's good for seeing if there's DJD, but it's not a natural stance. So OFA, I'm not saying it's terrible, but it doesn't have as much science behind it. In all the years that they've been doing evaluations, there's no peer-reviewed clinical study on the science of hip joint conformation. And matter of fact, in some things you'll read, they call it subjective hip joint conformation because it's three individuals that do it. I'll tell you a story. There was an American Bulldog called Mufasa my friend used to have. He's probably one of the most sought after dogs, 20 years ago. And I had another friend that bought his dad and called me and said, would you keep him? Blah, blah, blah. He was like, I think he was 7 or 8 years old when I got him. And I got the dog. He was a little rough looking because he was older. He was a weight pull dog. And so I took him in and I was wanting to PennHip him. And my friend's like, no, I'm afraid. I want you to collect him first because I paid a lot of money for him. So I don't want him to be put under like that. I said, okay, well, I'll do an OFA because he's so old. He's 7 years old. If there's wear on his hips, it's had to have started already. So we did it, and he came back borderline. Yeah, I think he was borderline. And it didn't show, it didn't say they had any DJD or osteoarthritis. It said shallow hip joint. The hip joint was shallow. Well, I was like, if he's 7 years old, he was a weight pull dog. If he doesn't have any arthritis or any wear, he's probably got really nice hips. So, you know how the dog game is. The results came in and I posted it, and people were like, oh my God, you're going to breed a dysplastic dog. And I'm like, he's not, he's technically the hip joint conformation is not what OFA thinks it should be. So they can call him mildly dysplastic or borderline dysplastic. So I got tired of it. And finally I told him, look, if I PennHip him and he dies, I'll pay you the money. So I took him back a month later and I did OFA again, and I did PennHip. And at 7 some odd years, he came back 0.44, which is pretty good, pretty tight hips. But the surprising thing is his OFA came back good.
Wow,
So
really?
In 30 days, things changed.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's 3 different guys that looked at it. I don't know what the whole thing is. But so OFA is good. I don't want to knock OFA because I use OFA now because PennHip is a lot more expensive. But people just need to understand what they're looking at. The OFA is a subjective hip joint conformation evaluation. Of course, if there's DJD or osteoarthritis, all bets are off. It doesn't really matter. At that point, the hips are faulty, they're loose, they're wearing, There was a study done by Purina Farms, or by Purina, that it was a 14-year study with 2 colonies of Labradors. And that study, I guess that was out 12, 15 years ago. And in that study, they started with the pups at 4 months and they x-rayed their hips with PennHip. And then they did it every year of their life. And on their birthday, they had them OFA'd and PennHipped. So they had 2 colonies. They had a colony that was a normal weight, and then they had a colony that was a little bit overweight. That's what the study was really about. It wasn't about hips, but they wanted to show that if you keep your dog lighter, he won't have hip problems as bad. He'll just be a healthier dog, which, big surprise. We all know that. It's the same way with humans. If you're thin, you're usually going to be healthier. But the real surprising thing was all the data that went along, because it was a head-to-head contest between OFA and PennHip. I also, early on, there's a place in New Jersey called the Seeing Eye Institute. They breed German Shepherds, Golden Retrievers, and Labradors for seeing eye dogs.
Okay.
I forget the doctor's name. I think his name was Dr. Lighton. I spoke to him, and he was pretty interesting. It was pretty interesting. They used both OFA and PennHip, and then they finally just started using PennHip. And of course, they breed. They want the hips to be sound because they're going to spend a lot of time and money doing, training and then place a dog with somebody. And they want it to work 10, 12 years. So the hips are pretty important to them. So they would do the whole litter, every pup in the litter, they'd PennHip, and then they'd average out those scores and give the litter a hip value, and they'd breed that way. They also bred pretty tight on hips to lock it in. I can get into that a little bit later too. So that guy pretty much his basic conclusion was we use PennHip, and what we do is we create a gene pool within the breed of tight hip dogs. And, they have other criteria too, not really conformation so much, but, obviously trainability and a certain type of temperament and things like that. So that was one. Then back to the Purina Farm study. Those two colonies, the oldest living dog in the study was 14 years old. That's why it's a 14-year study.
Okay.
But at 2 years of age, OFA will certify your dog either OFA good, fair, or excellent, or mildly dysplastic, borderline, mildly dysplastic, and then so on. So of the dogs in the study that were certified, which means at 2 years of age they were either fair, good, or I don't think they were any excellence. They found that over the years, they would consider certified is a dog that has no DJD, no osteoarthritis.
Mm-hmm.
So the dogs that they said at 2 years were certified, 55% of them went on to develop osteoarthritis or degenerative joint disease. So it's not that good of a predictor. Like 55%, you could flip a coin. I mean, it's more science than flipping a coin, but I mean, those are the odds. So at 2 years of age, there's really not a good threshold that, hey, the hips I'm looking at conformationally are not going to change. There's nowhere. Whereas where PennHip, they don't have a pass or fail. They have a score. And the tighter the hip on the dog, the tighter PennHip score could go longer without having any osteoarthritis, any DJD. And so the tighter the hips, the longer the dog can go. I imagine, and like I said, the threshold in most breeds are 0.30 or tighter. If the dog is 0.30 or tighter at 4 months, a year, whatever, they probably could live their normal life without ever developing any DJD or osteoarthritis, which is the ultimate goal for everybody. I don't know if it's that achievable, but I mean, I've kind of done it. Like I said, when I first was in the breed, the first probably 15 years, that was my thing. I was like everybody. I thought I knew everything, but I looking back now, I knew nothing.
Yeah.
I thought I check elbows, I check hips, blah, blah, blah. I put a lot of selection pressure on hip tightness and all this stuff. And don't get me wrong, I think that's a great thing to do. But now the American Bulldogs have other issues that are a lot more important than the hips. Because like I said, some of them can have quite a bit of laxity and it doesn't really affect them much. And
Right.
I don't breed dogs that have loose hips, but it's not the end all be all. When I first started out, that was pretty much, I didn't know a whole lot of other stuff. Because when you first get in the breed, of course, all the other breeders are telling, oh, no, we don't have trouble with this. We don't have trouble with that. Oh, that. No, my dogs can catch hogs in the heat and they do this and that. And then you start going to dog shows and you're like, oh, what are these dogs overheating for? What is going on?
Yeah.
And temperaments and whacked out weird temperament dogs that for no reason want to bite somebody or they're real civil, skittish, stupid, and then you get breeders that are like, oh yeah, he's a tough dog and he's a fear biter.
Yeah.
And people line breed on that stuff and then somebody got bit.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other things that are a little more important. I mean, if money was no object, I'd do every pup in the litter and do all this stuff that the Seeing Eye Institute did. Unfortunately, that's not my case. I'm a working guy, so I can't. And I quit selling dogs to breeders and show people. I just got burnt out on it. I had, if you've been in it a while, you realize
it's too much.
Show dog breeders are a pain in the ass.
Oh, God,
They call you up at 6 months. I don't know. He didn't win. His tail looks funny. His ears are weird.
Right.
Like give him a chance. Let him grow up. He's a baby. He's not a mature dog yet. Or you get people that, all they're looking for is that hot looking dog that's going to sell them puppies and stuff like that.
Yeah. Some of those forums you got to watch it, because I noticed that a big mistake that even older breeders make. We market to each other too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then
You know.
that's where all the crap, you get people, they
Yeah.
get jealous and they're like,
Uh
oh, they see people online talking about one of your dogs and like, well, that
huh.
dog's not, no, why is not anybody talking about my dog?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
dog,
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
what? That dog's a piece of crap.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you
That
got
dog's got beagle in him
right. All
or
them,
whatever.
yeah. Yeah.
Whatever nonsense they'll say. It's usually
Hmm.
to knock you down a couple notches
That's
because
right. That's what it
they
is.
feel their dogs need the respect and nobody's
Hmm.
paying attention to them. But
Exactly. Yeah.
so hips are a big thing. I like I said, I wish I could do every one of my dogs, every pup in the litter. I'd have a lot more information,
Yeah.
but I mainly market my dogs towards pet people.
Hmm.
I never did before. When I started at first, I was like, oh no, this dog's going to change the breed. This dog's awesome. I want this dog to go to a breeder and be bred. And then I had 20 years of that. And I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah.
The pet
Well.
people, at least, they take great care of the dogs. They send me pictures at Christmas and they call me at 10, 12 years of age crying that the dog died and tell me what a great dog it was and how it changed their life and blah, blah, blah. That
Mhm.
That's uh, worth a grand less than what you could sell it to for some of these.
So everyone's gonna want to know this one. Uh, a lot of times you hear you can test two dogs, they'll come out fine, hips fine. Is there any chance of production of bad hip dogs out of two good hip
Oh
dogs?
yeah, that gets really involved because I could have a dog. Let's say, like I said, the tighter the hip score, the better that dog is.
Hmm.
I've had dogs as tight as like 0.19, 0.24.
Hmm.
Those particular dogs are never going to get problems unless they got injured. But naturally, they're not going to wear their hips. But let's say that they're the one dog in that breeding that has great hips. It's like you breed dogs, you might have one Cane Corso that's 125 pounds and built awesome, but
Hmm.
all his other brothers and sisters are 82-pound weaklings and they are just look nasty. They look like somebody
Hmm.
hit them and they ran them over and they didn't grow right or something. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
genetically, that dog with the great hips, he's got the same genotype and the same genetics as all those dogs in that other litter.
Hmm.
The other thing with that is when you say great hips, if you're doing an OFA at 2 years, and let's say it's OFA fair, OFA good, and OFA is looking at hip conformation, and there's no science that says hip conformation is a good predictor, you're working on a faulty premise. The science isn't there. Whereas PennHip is a measurement, and I when I started out, I the first, I guess it was the fourth dog I got that it was a keeper, and then she was just a new kind of nicer type, tight muscled. She PennHip 2836. She was the first bully champion in the country. Really good dog. She wasn't perfect, but she was a really really good dog. So uh, I started out because I used to be a big fan of game bred pit bulls and how they breed them,
Hmm.
and I wanted to breed her to that dog Mufasa I was telling you about, and I tried. And next thing I know, she's 3.5 years old, never had a litter because he couldn't breed her. He couldn't tie her because they were almost the same size, and they're
Hmm.
both muscle bound as can be. And I tried artificial insemination with her, never would work. So I just finally one day took her to her nephew,
Hmm.
who was a good dog, but not the caliber of the other dog. So anyway, had that litter. So that female Broadzilla, I first breeding I ever did with her, I inbred her to her uncle or nephew. The second breeding, I inbred her to another nephew. The third breeding I did was kind of an outcross. And then her last breeding, I had taken a half brother, half sister off her and bred them together
Hmm.
and produced this really nice dog I had called Groucho. Uh, and I bred him back to his double grandma, which is to me, what I call inbreeding, because it's 75%, 3/4, my dog Broadzilla. So Broadzilla had really tight hips. Those pups in that litter, because they were tightly bred and they're lined up 75% on a dog that's 2'8", 3'6", it had more punch. It delivered, even when I bred her to stuff that wasn't tightly related to her, she tended to throw her genes. And that's the same way with anything. So if you have a dog that's, let's say, I hate to say OFA excellent, because like I just got done telling you that OFA is a subjective hip score.
Right.
So at 2 years of age, that threshold isn't really scientifically proven to guarantee that the hips are going to be good. Like an OFA excellent dog could move on in its 6 years, start having DJD and osteoarthritis, wear on their hips. Dysplastic, what I would call dysplastic. So it depends. It's like anything. If you have a dog, if you're breeding for conformation and you have a dog that's just perfect, beautiful, but every other dog in his litter is horrible, or his parents are horrible, he's probably going to throw horrible. He's anomaly. He's not the rule. He's the exception. Same with hips. When you breed for tighter hips, the hip laxity, it's an inheritable trait. That tight tendon or whatever, that certain hip joint that's tight, that is extremely hereditary. And it's not guaranteed, but when you breed tight on that, that's what the guy at the Seeing Eye Dog had told me. They love, if they can get a hub dog, a stud or a female they're breeding off of this, let's say a German Shepherd or something that's got crazy, super tight hips in the twos, and he produces a daughter or a niece that's also in the twos, and they inbreed them, or as your buddy Kenny says, backbreed.
Back cross, yeah.
If you do that, you're just eliminated a bunch of, concentrated those genes that produce that tight distraction index. So that dog will have a stronger potential to throw those tight hips. Whereas, so many people breed, I'm not going to say what's right or wrong, but a lot of people think, I'm not going to breed tight. That causes diseases or something.
Oh my God, yeah.
Isn't true, but I mean,
it's not true. Yeah,
it just exposes what's in the dog already. But
that's right.
If you take, a lot of sport people in our breed, they're diligent about checking hips and doing that. They may do OFA, even if they do PennHip, and then they breed 2 PennHip dogs that got super tight hip scores that say in the top 10% of the breed, but they have literally nothing in common. In 5 generations, they may have 2 dogs that are related. And so you're introducing 2 universes of genes. I tell people from my experience, and I'm not a super educated geneticist or anything, but I've inbred the shit out of dogs. I've inbred, line bred, outcross. I've done it all. I've tried everything, and I find that when you breed dogs tight, it's kind of like having a snow globe with all the snow at the bottom, and you combine them, and they're all the genes lay again in the same pattern, very common genes, because you're doubling up on them. But when you outcross, it's like you take that snow globe and you shake the crap out of it, and those genes are flying around, and how they settle is different. But it's not going to be the way it is when you're breeding something tight. You may pull something from a dog 6 generations back,
That's
2
right.
generations back. Your consistency's gone. So it's the same way with hips or any trait. The more you whittle it down, the more, and the rub with inbreeding for me with American Bulldogs is our breed has one of the 4 fathers of the breed put an English Bulldog in the mix, like in the 70s. And if the truth were known, probably a lot more other people did it too. And I'm sure people did it before him too. It's just American Bulldogs are kind of a country bulldog. And the history's not documented There's no books or videos that have any facts in them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like what I'm saying, just hypothesis.
Right.
But most American bulldogs or country bulldogs in America, I think, were catch-weight pit bulls that were just country bred. Bob down the road's got a really good bird dog pit bull, whatever, cross that catches, and he's a great working dog, and he lets the kids pull on his ears and ride him, and he's just a wonderful dog, and so I'm going to breed him. And that's kind of how, back in the day, people didn't have the internet. They didn't have cars. They may have a covered wagon or a horse. What are you going to put your dog on a horse and ride 2,000 miles and find a stud?
Right.
Stack it away. It happens. People bred to whatever. I've said it a bunch of times before. Like I thought 15 years ago, I went out looking for hog hunters that I would place dogs with to prove my dogs in the woods. Mm-hmm. And hog hunters, they're dog guys, but they don't breed. They're usually not breeders, and their main focus is hunting hogs. They mm-hmm. like to catch wild boar. That's their crack. Yeah, not breeding dogs, but mm-hmm. they do breed sometimes, and it's amazing. Like I've gotten to know a bunch of them. They've had a bunch of my dogs, and I'll ask them, well, what is that dog? Oh, pit bull. Oh, it's a pit bull? Well, it's pit bull, and it may have a little Catahoula, it may have a little black mouth cur, and this and that, blah, blah, blah. So they don't think that. I had a friend of mine, he's a good friend of mine now. One of my first dogs that I placed with him was a female he called Grace. And I went on a hog hunt with him, and I was like, oh, she's not doing the right thing. She's not a good catch dog to me, because she would get in front of the hog and get too aggressive. You don't want a catch dog to get in front of the pig and rebite. You never want to rebite. You want to grab a hold and hold the pig so you can kill the pig or whatever. Mm-hmm. So Grace would do these stupid things, but he liked her because she had no hesitation. She'd grab the pig, and he had these Catahoula plot hounds or something that would, once the bulldog grabs a pig, they'll jump on and they'll catch. And when you got 5, 4, 3 dogs holding a pig, it's a little safer than 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So he liked that. So he tells me, hey, I'm going to breed Grace. I'm going to breed her. I'm like, oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Who do you want to breed her? I thought she was going to bring her back to my place and breed her to one of my dogs. And he said, oh, I'm breeding her to Bozo. Bozo? Oh, well, what's his pedigree? Oh, Bozo's half Weimaraner, pit bull, this, and that. He's in like 3 different breeds. I'm like, what? Why would you do that? He goes, because he's a good catch dog, and she's a good catch dog. Yeah. And which, that's kind of how dogs were bred. Poor people didn't have options. They didn't care. I mean, nobody had papers. Nobody had. There was no value past what the dog can do for you. Mm-hmm. People weren't. I'm Italian. My parents are from Sicily. Although I'm not an expert on Cane Corsos, but I'm an expert on old Italians.
Right.
Yeah. In the Depression, when the war's going on, people are not. Today I have a cousins and an aunt that still lives in Sicily. They don't spend a lot of money on dogs. I mean, if they spend $1,500, that's a huge.
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
So think about my dad. They had trouble feeding their kids. They're not, nobody had the luxury of walking around saying, "Oh, I'm going to breed I am looking for a specific Cane Corso." They. In today's standards, maybe those dogs back then weren't even considered like what we consider purebred, paperwork and embarked DNA and all that nonsense. They were like,
it was more about what they could do.
Yeah. Can he kill something that's trying to kill my cattle, or is he trying to catch something, or does he work for me?
That's right.
And that's the way it was with American Bulldogs. So it's 6 one, half dozen the other. It's hard to say. I used to never think this way when basically when I started, I was kind of like had a show dog mentality. I was always been into dogs, but I was pretty fanatic, crazy about Dobermans when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I'd go to shows, and I subscribed to Doberman Quarterly and Doberman World magazine, and I'd go to Schutz and try anything with the Doberman in it. I'd go to, and so I was really just like everybody into the conformation, the look. That was pretty much, most, I think all people that breed dogs, except maybe if you're a specific working dog guy, they put all their value in the look. And of course, everybody's real uh, weird about, I have paperwork. My dogs are 100% this, 100% that, blah, blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah. So it's the same way, even with hips. People are like, well, my dog's OFA excellent, and I'm breeding him to an OFA good, and
Mm-hmm.
but they're not related. You're just breeding dogs that are almost have nothing to do with each other. So yeah, you could produce a whole litter of pretty good hips, or you could produce some garbage. It just what's stacked up in their pedigree.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's why, like, Seeing Eye Institute said they had their best results from what you guys are calling back breeding, two tight dogs that are tightly related.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a lot of outcrosses too, because uh, and like I said, in my breed, the big problem is breathing. The dogs have gotten thicker and bullier and bigger headed and shorter muzzled. They've selected for more of the sour muggy type English Bulldog traits, and those traits are no good for breathing. And it's not. I started going to shows 20 years ago, and on a 75-degree day, and these big old American Bulldogs were turning, their tongues are turning gray, they're overheating, and it's like, whoa, this is, for the first 6-7 years, I never knew they had a breathing issue at all, because I had that huge dog that had he was like a giant mastiff. He had a hard palate and a long nose. He could breathe. And even my bullier dogs, I had air conditioning for them. I had a little kennel built off my garage. They didn't have to do anything. I didn't do a whole lot of stuff with them. So as I got into the breed more and more, I realized, hey, I'm not really being told the truth on these dogs. And
Mm-hmm.
then, and of course, when I first got into it, the dogs were pretty much just scatterbred. American Bulldogs in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s. If you, looking back now, I realize they were probably more of a composite breed, a scatterbred, country bred bulldog, and then along the way, everybody was trying to fix things, and other people, whether we know about it or not, were crossing other things in there
Right.
to try to straighten things out, which is kind of the dilemma I've had. Once I realized, hey, you know what? I built these really nice dogs. They're real pretty. People love them. They got great hips. Blah blah blah. But they can't breathe worth a shit.
Mm-hmm.
They they can fall over dead if you don't watch it. And that's another part of the thing. English Bulldogs are supposed to be 50, maybe 60 pounds. But when you got a 90 or 100-pound American Bulldog, and they got all those same short muzzle traits and that, and they got a crazy prey drive, and they don't
Yeah.
have common sense. They're a bulldog, and they get riled up. Uh,
So it's about to get hot, especially where we live. What do you do about how do you help a overheating dog?
well, I tell anybody that gets a puppy from me, if you have any inclination at all, the dog is breathing hard, or especially if he's making that, uh, pull out the garden hose. First, get his feet cold. I have well water.
Mm-hmm.
Get his feet cold, then do his belly, and then put the hose down his throat to clear any mucus. And if that doesn't cool him off enough, uh, soak him. And I tell people, whatever the worst thing you could do for an overheating dog is spritz him with the water hose, because what happens is the water gets trapped in the layer of his fur,
Ooh.
and that water that gets trapped turns into like a wetsuit. When you put on a wetsuit, it traps water, and then that water gets to the heat of your skin and
Mm-hmm.
actually insulates you when you're in cold water. Well, in a dog, it's worse, because the water builds up in their fur, and that will actually cook them. So
Mm.
I tell people, don't just rinse them off a little bit. You have to run cold water over them for a long time, 10, 15, 20 minutes, put it down their throat till you hear they're breathing perfectly clean, and you can feel they're not even panting. Back in the day, um, I used to have my dogs. I don't know, my dogs would go completely ape shit when I turned on my tractor and start cutting grass.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one dog in particular, my dog Shrek. He'd bounce off. He was nutty anyway, but he just was flipped out. He wanted to kill the lawnmower, and he would not. It didn't matter how hot he would not stop. And so I'd cut grass, and then I'd have to jump off the lawnmower and just drench him with water for 10 minutes, freezing cold water. I'd do it to the point where he wasn't panting anymore. He was almost shivering.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing. Nowadays, I don't have problems because I went through I went through 20 years of trying to fix that trait. I pretty much have it fixed, I think. But I probably still have a lot of work to do. And I could still probably produce a dog or two that has not the best breathing. But I live in the woods, and all my dogs have huge, big paddocks to run. And they have pretty much shade. But I don't know that I don't have any dogs that go completely nuts like that, like my old dogs used to just. They would just lose their mind. If the lawnmower gets close to them, they get excited and bark, but they don't lose their mind. I think it's also because one of the things I've done, I've outcrossed to, there's two types of American Bulldogs. There's standard type, and then there's the bully type or the classic type. The standard type is probably more houndy pit bull blood. They have a longer muzzle. They don't have as crazy proportions. And they don't have, because they don't have as much English Bulldog in them or whatever, Doggy Bordeaux, Bull Mastiff, who knows, or Boxer, who knows what people put in.
Right.
They don't have the palate issues as much. So I've outcrossed to them a lot. I mean, I've tried every which way there is. And like I said, I've inbred probably more than anybody in the American Bulldog. Well, I know, except from one of my friends in Pennsylvania. He's more successfully inbred than I have. Uh, so, I've outcrossed, which is just messes everything up to a point. But I had to do it to reduce the English Bulldog genes to get them down, because most bully American Bulldogs, I've taken pedigrees and mapped them all the way back into the 70s and figured out the percentage of just one English Bulldog that Mr. Johnson put in. And most of them are 25%. Because he didn't just breed to it and then breed back to his dog. He bred it, produced dogs from the first cross, and line bred off of them.
Right.
So he changed the whole makeup of the breed. His dogs changed because he lived in Georgia, and he was an old-fashioned guy. The dogs had to have puppies outside in a shed. They never came in the house. They never had air conditioning. And so they either made it or they didn't.
They did,
But the problem was, in the 90s, the dogs that he had were more influenced from that English Bulldog in the look, and that's what everybody liked. And when I got in the late 80s, early 90s, you'd have litters of Johnson-type dogs, and you might have a St. Bernard-looking dog in there. You may have a Boxer-looking dog. You may have a straight-up oldie-looking dog, and a couple bird dogs in the same litter. Nobody established really line bred or did anything to establish consistency. And like I said, those dogs, if the truth were known, they probably were composites of crosses of different stuff. Right. So the breathing turned a lot worse because in the 90s or 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Johnson had pretty famous dogs. A dog called the Mean Machine, Incredible Mean Machine, Red Machine. They were pretty bully because they were about 25%, but they were closer to the cross. They didn't live real long, and they didn't produce real long on Johnson's property because, in Somerville, Georgia, the wintertime's great, but summertime you go down there, it's hell. It's humid,
brutal.
195 every day. It gets like that here in St. Louis, but not as bad probably as in Georgia.
Right.
So his dogs changed because he would say, It's God's will,
Yeah,
survival of the fittest.
that's right. Yeah.
To a point.
So you said something. You said when you outcross, you kind of undo things.
Yeah.
Will you explain
Uh,
that to the people so they can know what you mean?
well, when you outcross, all the work I do with hips, all that stuff, that goes out the window because, like I said, you're taking two universes of genes, putting them together, shaking them up, and how they realign is totally different. In some
Mm-hmm.
ways, it throws like in American Bulldogs, early some of the really popular dogs were from a 3/4 cross. They were a 3/4 Johnson, 1/4 what they call painter, which is a standard dog.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy on the West Coast, he's the guy who produced the dog for that movie Homeward Bound, Kyle Sims. The name of his kennel was Sure Grip, and he developed they have the term in American Bulldogs. It's stupid term, but it's so ingrained. They call them hybrids, which is the big fat Johnson type and the Scott type bred together. With the standard now they call it in the classic. They bred them together to get a better dog in between, and so they'd call these dogs hybrids, which you know they're the same breed. They're supposed to be the same breed. So they're related a tiny bit, but they call them hybrids, which is some people live by it today. Some of these sport people are like, oh, I like a hybrid. I like a dog right in between or dog that's 50-50 pedigree,
Mm-hmm.
which they do produce some pretty good dogs. And some of the most popular bully dogs in our breed was a dog called Iron Man Tyson. He was from a male that was half Johnson, half painter, bred back to a Johnson female. And it produced a dog that was bigger, thicker, bullier than things that 100% Johnson would produce. He
Mm-hmm.
was 135 pound. He looked like a lion running around. He had a big head like a pumpkin, and but he could never produce himself. I bred my dog Brodzilla's from him. That was my dog. I bred to him 3 times. My friend bred to him. I probably saw tons of litters off of him, and he was a good dog himself. He was a good dog, and uh, but for producing his type, forget it. He wouldn't show
Really?
up at all. He wouldn't show
Right.
up at all. He his he would show up more of a moderate dog, but he was a good stud in that he threw great temperament, healthy dogs with medium, decent hips. But when everybody breeds to a stud and they pay good money to breed to him, they want to produce
They
him,
want. That's right.
and
Yeah.
you're not going to get that no matter what you
Right.
do. Basically, the female, whatever your female is, he may make her a little bit bigger, thicker, a couple of little features here and there, but you're not going to get him. And I think people gave up even trying to reproduce him. He was bred to a lot of standard dogs that produced a lot of good dogs, but they're standard looking. They don't look like him.
Right.
And like I said, then there was a dog from similar blood, but bred a whole lot tighter, was that dog Mufasa. And he was like my dog Broadzilla. When I saw him, I was like, whoa, this dude is awesome. Like he was a cut above everybody. His structure was good, but he just had this crazy muscle, tight skin, really pretty head, big cheeks, big old, looked like a giant cranium on him. And he had a lot of drive. He was really a fun dog. My friend Kenny owned him, loved the shit out of that dog, and socialized him and did so many things with him. And he did. He had a great temperament. He was just a wonderful dog. But he came from 2 dogs that were the dog I told you about that we did the OFA. He was an inbred dog, and he was built like a kite. His ass was real narrow. His front end was real wide. He had a little Beetlejuice head. He was only about 80 pounds, 75, 80 pounds. He was mentally retarded. There was something wrong with him. His temperament just was wrong.
Yeah.
But he was tight muscled. He was bred tight. And then he was bred to this female that was the opposite. She had a great temperament, excellent working dog, all that stuff. But her ass was higher than her head. Her front end looked like a wishbone.
Mm.
And I know why the guy bred her, because she was a phenomenal weight pull dog, and just temperament wise, you couldn't get a better female. She'd do anything you wanted her to do. She was tough. She was friendly. She was stable. And those two came together and poof, produced this weird anomaly, this dog Mufasa, who was just a freak of nature, beautiful. He pretty changed the breed. Everybody, at first, everybody attacked him because he was a new, different thing, accused him of being a cross of this and that and blah, blah, blah. But then people started breeding to him and getting his puppies, and now some of these pedigrees, he's in it. So many shots of Mufasa, it's ridiculous. Now, I loved him. I loved the dog personally, but I bred to him, and he was like, he's a shitty stuff. He produced his mom and dad. He produced problems, and early on, my whole thing was conformation. I came from Dobermans. Mm-hmm. A real shitty structured Doberman is better than most dogs conformation wise. Mm-hmm. And so when I got into this breed, they all had horrible structure, real cowhocked rear ends, or shoulders are so far forward, or real bowed out shoulders and wishbone front ends. So I started getting that, and I was like, what the hell? I'm going backwards. And he threw a disorder I didn't know anything about when I bred to him called ichthyosis. It's some weird disorder. You can catch it. You can see it in a puppy. It's where the dog's skin produces too much oil and it flakes all the time, so their fur looks moth-eaten. And if they have it really bad, they smell. They smell like fish oil. Well, I got my first puppy when I bred to him with that. And I was like, hell. And they used to not have a test for it. But I kind of dodged that bullet because my dog Broadzilla, I inbred her 3 times and line bred her after that quite a bit, and I never got it. So I pretty much figured she didn't have it. And sure enough, all these years later, I don't get dogs with ichthyosis too much. I've never actually, since they've developed the test, I've never had one come back with it. I'm sure I do. I'm sure I have some, because my dogs aren't 100% Broadzilla, but.
Right.
So that is kind of, when you're breeding hips, it's probably a polygenetic trait, but it's that the only thing that I've seen in research is that that tendon, the tightness of that tendon, the distraction index, the tightness of the hips. That's the only thing that is really translates. But I'm sure there's other things too. I was listening to somebody talk about a lot of guys. They're like, yeah, but environment has a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. Well, environment has a lot to do with dogs with loose hips developing problems. I have people say, oh, no, my dog got that because he's walking on slick floors. My wife wants those stupid hardwood floors, or tile floors. And that could be true, but your dog had loose hips. That's why your dog had a loose distraction index, unless it was injured. An injury is an injury, but walking on slick floors or running too much or jumping, and for people
stairs and stuff, all that people say,
it's the environment. It's the environment. No, I mean the working dog should be able to be running all the time, jumping and doing stuff to a point. Okay. I mean, if you got a big 140-pound dog, no, they're not a circus poodle, but they should be able to carry their weight, run and do stuff at least till they're 9 years old or 8 years old without having issues, and that all relates to that tightness of the hip, the distraction index.
Let me ask you this. What are some visual signs you can see that you got a problem with hips or joints, and what ages is like you in big trouble?
Well, I've had two dogs. I told you I've done outcrosses. I outcrossed, and I made the mistake of thinking, because the bloodline that I outcrossed to is tightly bred, and they have like all these OFA goods and even OFA excellent dogs. And I thought, well, I'm not going to worry, because it's only, I'm not outcrossing to them and breeding, 3/4 of their blood. I outcrossed to them to try to add breathing traits, basically, and then go back to my blood and try to retain those. So I didn't spend all the money to PennHip all the dogs. The main dog that comes off that bloodline that I tried to use as my outcross is OFA good, and he came from an OFA good, and I saw the dog at an advanced age. He had a fat rear, movement is beautiful, just a great dog. So, and I don't know, I really haven't had trouble off of him, but off his bloodline, I've had other stuff off his bloodline, and I've had two freaking dogs, or actually three dogs. One is a dog that's in a pet home, and they love the dog. But what happens, I've never had this. In my dogs, I've never had this happen. Maybe it's the standard blood's a little different, but they look fantastic. And then in about 18 months, I've noticed their ass starts to atrophy. The muscles start to dwindle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it concerns me. And then I work my dogs a little bit, like on a spring pole, or in the wintertime, I take 2 or 3 dogs and a puppy, and I walk into my woods and walk around, and they run on, I got 8 acres. They run and run and run.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had any clinical signs. Well, I've had 2 dogs now that have, when they really work out, they'd come back, and they're like 12. One was 12 months, one was 18 months. And I noticed they were a little, not lame, not totally lame, but a little weird. So I'd go check, and sure enough, one hip's fantastic. The other one already has signs of wear. Mm-hmm. So that's from the outcross. I can't say it's the outcross blood because, like I said, when you put 2 dogs together, it doesn't matter if this one's got the tightest hips in the world. When you put them together, those genes are flying around.
Yeah.
There's genes in there for loose hips, and loose hips get together, and now you got one hip that's, for a dog that's under 2 years of age to have wear on a hip, that hip's got to be close to I'd say 8 to 1. And 1 is almost totally out of socket, like this.
Right.
So that's what outcrossing can do. You're introducing 2 oceans of genes, and what matches up and is expressed is like rolling the roulette wheel. You just don't know. That's why line breeding and inbreeding and lining up families of dogs, it's not just for, hey, I like an ear set, I like a foot a certain way, a certain structure, a certain temperament, a certain drive, breathing, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. In game dogs, which I've studied game dog pedigrees forever, and even in those, some of them are probably not true because that's just the nature of those guys.
Right.
But some of them are. I mean, they inbreed quite a bit.
They do.
And their trait, they're looking for, the one trait is the gameness, which I guess is something that eludes at the level, I guess, of those type of people that they're doing stuff with their dogs, and I guess that eludes them. But I there's a lot of other stuff that really, like game bred pit bulls. They're the most amazing athletes. You can't kill them with a ball peen hammer. I mean, they're tough. I mean, and some of them have the best temperaments there are, even though some of them are a little nutty, dog aggressive if in the wrong circumstance. But they breed them so tight. I've bred tight, but it's blown up in my face too, because like I said, I was starting with the Johnson classic bully gene pool. Like I said, is at least 25% English bulldog, and you can't. English bulldog is a mutated freak. He's got dwarfism. He's got the smashed face that's unnatural. He's just, everything about him is just a nightmare as far as genetics go. So if you're inbreeding with that, you're going to get shit. And I did an inbreeding. I didn't sell any of the puppies. I kept them and watched, and they didn't turn out for me. And I did another one that was kind of a little stepping over the line, and I actually got the same faults. These broke down pasterns in the front, where their front pasterns, they're broke down.
Yeah.
First inbreedings revolved around my dog Broadzilla, and that was one of her faults. She didn't have as hard of a pasturing as I liked, and that was her dad Tyson. He was the same way. His pasturings are a little down. And then I did most recently, probably 5 years ago, I had a dog Mayday. He was the best, most proven woods dog, catch dog. He went to a hog hunter friend of mine when he was a puppy, and he became a legend here in southern Missouri as a catching fool. Like, he was perfect catch dog. Really chill temperament. He'd get along with anybody else, but when the hog came, he slammed it, no hesitation, and he'd hold it and almost fall asleep holding the pig. He also, the first guy that had him, my friend Gary, I didn't realize it because I'm not really a hog hunter. I've been on hog hunts, but I'm not a hunter. But he took him and used him as what they call a running catch dog. So most catch dogs, they're in the truck, in the crate, and then they got bay dogs that run and find the hog. Once they got the hog bayed, they have GPS, and you drive up, and then you grab your bulldog 50 feet out, and you might let him go. And he runs right in and catches. Well, some people with running catch dogs, they just let them all loose. The bulldog is running with the hounds.
Right.
Well, hounds may run 5 miles. They might run 6 miles finding a pig. Well, a bulldog, you don't want that bulldog to be tired or worn out.
Right.
Well, this dog Mayday used to run. His GPS collar some days would say 12 miles he ran that whole day.
Really?
And might have been on 3 catches. So he was a weird freak. So I inbred him. I took him to his daughter, and then that female was the resulting female out of that was a pretty good dog. And my friend in Pennsylvania did a breeding like this, and I thought, maybe I should see just what will come of it. So I bred him back to his inbred daughter, which makes his pedigree 7/8 Mayday, which is, the COI is just crazy. That's insane. The pups were good. I'll accept the pasturings suck. The one female was a little too small, and they were too sharp. I don't know where that came from, but I mean, it's in the breed too.
Explain sharp.
Like, the final straw with the one male, he was beautiful, except his front pasturings weren't as great. But I have a friend that came over, and he drove down to where my dogs are with me, and he had a new truck, and he'd never been to my house with that truck. And so this pup, 9-month-old or 8-month-old puppy, lost his crap. And he would just flip out because that truck was there, and he was just off. His hackles were up. He wouldn't shut up. It took 30, 40 minutes. He never calmed down. That new thing on the property pissed him off, and I was like, that's just not right. That's something that my greatest fear with these dogs is selling somebody a dog that bites somebody or hurts somebody, especially a kid. And it's something that can happen. I mean, like I said, there's a whole bunch of young guys out there with American Bulldogs that think they got a tough dog because he growls and barks at people. And I've told them, I said, I'm not an expert, but the dog is fearful. He's, a lot of dogs, civil type dogs, they're triggered by, they're motivated by fear. They're suspicious. They're fearful. I just want nothing to do with that. I want a dog that sees a kid and wags his tail. Yeah. I want a dog that sees a stranger. If it comes to the fence when I'm not home, okay, he's allowed to bark and carry on and defend his territory. But I don't want him to jump the fence and kill everybody. I don't want him to just kill the UPS guy for no reason.
You want him with a good mind. What I mean?
You want to American Bulldogs, they call it an off switch. I used to put up pictures of my dogs with trophy hogs and stuff, and people see that and they think, oh, I wouldn't want a dog like that around my kids. And I'm like, oh my God, it's just the opposite. Like that dog Mayday, my friend would go hunting with him all day and come home, and his kids would be jumping all over him. And the dog had blood on his face and licked the kids in the face. It's just the opposite. If a dog can go through that, pressure, because if you got a 200-pound wild boar, that guy is not trying to sniff your dog's butt. He wants to slash him in half. He'll slash you in half.
Right.
This is not a joke. It's not. There's no room for hesitation. Nothing. And a lot of dogs that get into that tussle, get into that whole chaos, they'll lose their shit. A lot of them don't catch. A lot of them run off, or a lot of them just flip out. And then if they get so excited, they may grab another dog or something, you know? Right. So the dog that can consistently go out there, grab the pig, become a boat anchor, you know, when the pig's dead, he calms down, loads up to go get another one. That is a really strong tempered dog. You know, like that dog Mayday. I don't have any kids, and all my nieces are in their 30s, and nobody comes over with their kids. I'm the weird uncle who lives way out in the woods. So my dogs, some of them have never seen a kid. If they've seen a kid, maybe it's from a distance in a parking lot when they're in the back of my car. They don't know anything, but I've time and time again, I take at Easter or something. Sometimes the kids want to see a dog. I'll bring a dog out, and I've never had one ever act weird, growl, they just naturally just want to be hugged on and petted, and that's what I want.
Right.
It's like the old-fashioned pit bull guys used to say, if a pit bull's man aggressive, he can't be game, and he's a man biting cur. They call it biting cur.
Yeah,
I don't want a man biting cur. I've done protection with my dogs. You know, my dog Clyde, I could have got a PSA with him. He had all the bite work, but he did it. He loved people. I mean, he loved people, but he knew that guy's in the bite suit. I can rough him up. We can fight, but he loved that guy. He didn't work in civil. He worked in prey drive, but he won hardest hitting contests. He'd slam the shit out of people, knock them off their feet. But it was no hard feelings. He just liked the roughness. And some hardcore personal protection guys would have been like, that dog's equipment driven. Yeah, he's equipment driven. He's not. I don't want a dog that wants to just really chew somebody's arm off.
Right.
Because that's a liability. And if you breed dogs for all you know, the biggest fear are these people. No matter what you say, how much I prep people do stupid things. You know, they think, oh, he's a little human. He's my little guy. He's so sweet. I've had trouble with. I had a girl in New York that she, in her neighborhood, there's very few parks, and then they have dog parks, and she'll take her dog to the dog park. And I tell everybody, hey, this isn't a breed for dog parks. This isn't a breed for doggy daycare. You know, please don't do it.
Right.
And I've had several of them, but this lady calls me, oh my gosh, the dog put his paw on his back and he didn't like it, and they got into a fight, and he broke the dog's paw. He bit it and broke his paw, and now I got to pay for that. Do you think he's crazy? I'm like, no, he's not crazy. Well, why doesn't he get along? It's because he's a dog. He's not freaking, you know, dogs are pack animals, and he's a bulldog.
Yeah.
Bulldogs are not a golden retriever. You know, they're not a dog. Even golden retrievers. It's just the way society's going. I don't know what the deal is. My nieces, they do all that. They go to these dog parks, and I say, oh my God, don't take your dog to a dog park. Oh, but he loves it. He loves playing with other dogs. I said, well, I mean, that might be true, but it's not worth all the bad behavior he's going to get. I've had people take dogs to doggy daycare, and they're like, oh, he's moved to another group. He doesn't get along with these other dogs. Like, yeah, because he's a bulldog. He's not supposed to.
Okay, yeah.
So it's...
I don't do the dog parks and then, you know, being I raise big dogs, I mean, the simplest thing, your dog needs some training. And I tell people, look, get them some training. Don't let them jump up on people. Jumping up on somebody, knock an old lady down, child down, it's going to be a really big deal, you know, because you can get some of the breeds we deal with, a lot of us is here. If your dog get loose, you can see the fear in your neighbor's eyes. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I can imagine. Your dogs are huge.
Oh yeah.
I'm old now, so I'll be out in the field or something. My dogs are running. Yeah, they run straight at you. I always bend
Yeah.
my knees thinking, this
Yeah,
is
me
the
too.
time. They're going to bust my legs in half.
Right. Yeah, you just sit there like
Yeah, I cock my knees down, so I think if I get a hit, I won't break
Right.
my legs. But
Right.
and they're just my dogs. They're not trying to hurt me, but
Yeah.
yeah,
They have a good
it's a
time.
big problem. Like I said, my worst fear is I get a dog that kills somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
And
We don't
displaces
want that.
somebody. And the American Bulldogs there have been strains. I've tracked it pretty much what the blood is, but some of them dogs are real reactive, super hypersensitive. And there was a story of a dog Mr. Johnson sold to these people in New York. His original name I think was Titan, and so they got a puppy. And Johnson told me that they did pseudo protection work, and they lived on the fifth floor in the city. And he said they had some of their friends come in off the fire escape with wiffle ball bats and act like they're attacking them to get the dog to bite and do stuff. Well, the dog was a Looney Tune. Mr. Johnson got him back actually and bred him. He bred him one time, uh, and he named the dog Rebel Rouser. The Rebel Rouser, uh, I don't know what age, but he was a young dog. Some in New York City, they were at a stoplight in their car, and some people were fighting or arguing. He jumps through the window and bites them, breaks their hand or breaks their arm or something. He's a
Wow.
big old 100-pound dog. And then the second time was the girl was taking the dog to go out, and she gets in the elevator, and the guy's coming in. She goes, please, wait for the next elevator. My dog doesn't like men. And he goes, what? So he just got in, the doors closed, and the dog chomped him up.
Oh,
And
wow.
I even saw this. It was a certified letter Johnson got that said he takes full responsibility for the dog. So he gets the dog, puts him in a pen. From the airport, they have a little red wagon in a crate, wheel him over to this yard that's got a female in heat, and they threw him in there. He bred her. And then Johnson used to tell a story of when they got her out, they distracted him and got him out, and then the dog lost his shit and went crazy and destroyed the chain link gate. And he said the dog was okay with women, but he hated men. He
Really?
wanted to kill strange men, and so they had to shoot him.
Mm.
Well, that dog I was telling you about, my first big dog that I kept,
Mm-hmm.
his name was Rebel Machines Explosion. His grandpa was that dog.
Oh, really?
His father was a dog called Peeler's Chief. And Peeler's Chief was owned by a guy in Oklahoma called Jack Peeler, and he retired and left his house and his kennel to his kid. They used to be into pit bulls, and so his son he's an adult guy, took over, and that dog Peeler's Chief, I don't know what happened. He had to move him from a kennel to another kennel. This guy lives in Oklahoma. Literally, you could drive 15 minutes from the road to his house. So he's very remote, very back off the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, he grabbed Chief, and I don't know if he was pulling him or what he did, but Chief got after him. And the guy got saved because his friend happened to be coming over.
Oh,
And
wow.
saved, he could barely hold the dog back. They sold the dog to another guy out in California who is a friend of mine, doesn't breed anymore. And he thought, oh, Chief, he's fine. And Chief was fine with him and his family. And his partner, he had a business, a fish tank business. His partner, they went out of town. His partner came over to take care of him, which he saw Chief a million times. But just that one time, Chief attacked him, and that was the end of Chief. And there was another dog called Buster, I think his name was, in Ohio, off of Peeler's Chief also. Somebody came to cut the grass and they forgot to put the dog away, and they got a phone call from one of the neighbors. Your dog's running loose, and there's a bloody sweatshirt on the side of your house.
Whoa.
And that dog got, I don't know what people think. They sold them or gave them or sold them to somebody, and he ended up with another friend of mine who's dead now in California. He had him. He was a big 125-pound dog. And he was going to all these Schutzen clubs and stuff. He'd go, and so he brought that dog, saying, "Yeah, this dog got a live bite. And he's badass, and he's this and he's that." So these trainers and decoys that are very experienced guys, that train Schutzen and ring sport and everything, they suited up and they said, "Okay, let's test him and see." And after the end of their testing him, they said, "He is worthless. He is a fear biter. He's biting out of fear. He's skittish. He's fearful." And that when a dog bites you out of fear, that's a hard bite. They're not messing around. They're not kind of nipping or playing or fighting you. They're fearful. They're scared. So I think that dog went somewhere else and was bred. And they're all related to these dogs that go back to two dogs Johnson had. One called Machine Buckaroo and Machine Susie Q. If they're in that pedigree, something. I could go on. There's probably 15 or 20 other dogs all related to that stuff with that weird kind of temperament. And matter of fact, my dog, he was fine. He was a huge, oversized dog. Like he was 148 pounds and 29 inches at the shoulder. He was giant, and he was fine with me. But I'm kind of a dominant person, and I have when I was younger, especially, a big dog that would do anything that was dangerous. I had a good correction on that dog. So him and me, no problem. He loved my wife. He loved kids too. Like I had an incident at a park with a little toddler that just loved him, is leaning up against him. Well, the dad, they'd talk to us for 15, 20 minutes, and dad was like, "We got to get going." So he picked up the kid, and the kid threw his back and screamed. I didn't think anything of it. And next thing I know, my dog grabs the guy's jean pocket and rips it. Oh, you see this guy's tidy whities.
Yeah.
I was shaking. I couldn't believe that he did that. And by the time he hit 3 years of age, nobody could come to the house if you were a strange male, and I wasn't home. If I was home, everything was fine. But if it was just my wife, my father-in-law couldn't come over, my brother-in-law couldn't come over. He acted. It didn't make any sense, but it was genetic. So I never line bred on him.
I bet. Mr. Vito, my wife just came and told me I got to wrap it up because we got some stuff to do. But I want to come back because this was a very good show.
Yeah, sure. If anybody has questions or anything, we can go over it again.
Right. And because, man, I got to give you, man, you're a real one because you know how hard it is to get people with 20 to 30 years of experience. And we have a lot of new breeders just coming in, soaking up this information, man. Boy,
I could talk and talk. I'm kind of an old hermit now. So when I start talking about dogs, I have to. So I try to write stuff down and stick to a plan because I'll go off in all different directions.
Hey, that's all right. We could. I
get new guys that call me every once in a while, and I can tell when they're like, "Oh shit, this old guy, he'll talk forever."
No, it's all right. It's all right. But we got some really good information on the OFA things today. So I definitely want to do another one with you, brother.
All right, sounds good. Okay. It was fun. Thanks.
All right. We'll see you later.
All right, see you.
All right. Okay.
And that wraps up another episode of NWA Cane Corsos. Thank you for being a part of our Cane Corso community. Remember, you can stay connected with us beyond the podcast. Find us on all major media platforms by searching for NWA Cane Corsos. Whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube. Just hit that follow button to join the conversation and get the latest updates. If you have a burning question or want to apply to be a guest on our show, we'd love to hear from you. Simply shoot us an email at nwacanecorsos@gmail.com. And if you're a business interested in becoming a sponsor, reach out to us at the same email address. For more resources, exclusive content, and links to all our social media profiles, visit our website at nwacanecorsos.com. It's your go-to destination for everything dogs. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we can't wait to bring you more exciting episodes where we explore the fascinating world of dogs.